Hi, I'm Sean Godoy. I'm the owner and director of Divercity Property Solutions. We are a training and consulting company operating in the property sector.
Welcome to the African Tech Roundup, Sean.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, you're a long-time listener of the show, and I'd actually go as far as calling you a friend of the show. We've been in touch for a while now. You gave such awesome feedback on the coverage we do, and you're very active on social media. And for that reason, we really do appreciate you over here.
Oh, great. That's not a problem. You guys put out some great stuff, so I'm always happy to do my part to share and let people know about good sources such as yourself.
Well, thank you very much. We hope you rub off hard on everyone else listening right now. So listen, we were chatting the other day. I mean, you're obviously a property specialist. I know you have quite a bit of experience, not just here in South Africa, but in the London property market as well. And we were chatting the other day about the emergence of real estate tech as a trend globally. And of course, it's a trend led, I'd say, perhaps correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd say it's a trend led by interests based in New York, which, from what I understand, is the world's most lucrative, if not largest, property market. Given how competitive that landscape is and how crowded that city is, and all the pain points associated with that industry in a city like New York, I can totally understand why it might be a big deal in a market like New York City. Tell me a little bit about what I might not know, or what our listeners might not know about this trend emerging here on the continent.
Sure, yeah. I mean, yeah, you mentioned New York, which is obviously a fascinating property market, but it's one of the largest. I mean, London is there, and then obviously in Asia, there's some amazing cities, Hong Kong, Singapore, these types of places. So, I mean, it's a you get something called global cities, which those cities are, and they all compete in the sphere. And coming back to, so basically our real estate tech, or the term commonly used is prop tech.
Prop tech,
So
okay.
tech in property.
Mm,
So the thing with property. So my experience in London, New York perhaps is different to America, but in London, property was seen or is seen as a very traditional, old school industry, like wood paneled offices and this type of thing,
mm,
especially in the UK,
mm.
well, London, that's the city of gentlemen, I suppose.
Yeah, and also land
Um,
owning.
so it was one
In
of,
that context, I guess land owning also being, somewhat of a privilege in the UK. I mean, traditionally or historically.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, especially in London. And there's a long history of families owning large tracts of land, which is still the case in London and across the UK. So you'll have one family, which is, it's not always the royal family, but the crown does own quite a lot of central London, but there's other families as well. So yeah, within that context, it's steeped in history and families and so family names sort of controlling property, and then also within the corporate property sector, there's a lot of big names, etc. And it was seen as lagging. Basically, the point I'm trying to make is the tech wave, which was affecting and has affected, continues to affect many industries. So obviously big ones that pop to mind are Uber, which is disrupted. That's the big term. Obviously, it's disrupted the transport industry within taxi services, etc. And Airbnb, which is more related to property, which Airbnb is seen as a prop tech firm because it's a technology platform which has harnessed or given a new sort of lease of life on a very specific sector in property, which is short-term rentals, holiday rentals, that type of thing. So perhaps one thing people might not know is that our property was seen as lagging this tech wave, and it's become, I'd say in the last few years, it's really come to the fore. There's some really interesting European organizations and also in the US, all over the world, which are focusing on this now. Because property it's a massive industry, it really is. And it might sometimes be overlooked. I mean, everyone, sees the tech companies as the things they're doing, the products, the software, the hardware they're putting out there, or, they see the stock markets and banks, etc. But all of that plays out within property, obviously. Something people might not know is I'd say there's massive opportunity within the sphere. Even if you're not a property person,
Yeah,
you
I
might
mean,
be.
it's interesting you should say that because I wouldn't have thought of Airbnb as sort of a prop tech play. And I mean, part of the reason why I've invited you on the show is to sort of enlighten me in this area. It's really not an area we've talked about very much on the show, if at all. And also my understanding of the what and why of this emerging industry, as well as what sort of firms define the space. So taking Airbnb as an example, I mean, I recently hosted a press event they hosted here in Johannesburg just a few days ago, actually, where they announced for the first time the progress they're making on the continent. Some of the more catchy statistics they put out was the fact that they've now surpassed 100,000 listings on the continent. They claim to have brought 2 million global guests to local homes. And yet, perhaps it's because I'm an African or because I have these very traditional ideas about what property is, what land ownership is in the context of sort of having parents who grew up in villages and on farms and that kind of thing. And also, given how politicized land has always been and is certainly becoming in modern day South Africa, for example, politically. I suppose for that reason, I sort of think of prop tech as technology that helps or is linked directly to sort of ownership, which, in the case of Airbnb, is not the case,
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it plays in a number of spheres. I mean, I've got some interesting articles here that maybe we can share with your listeners, but there's a few things I'll quote. So first of all, the RICS, which is a UK-based organization, but it's a global professional body for the property sector, and they say proptech is an all-encompassing term that refers to all aspects of innovation and how this impacts the built environment. This includes software, hardware, materials, or manufacturing. So it really does span. That's why I said you don't have to be a property person, because within property there's a lot of moving parts. That's what first attracted me to property. It's a very diverse career which can take you a lot of different directions. And then to sort of answer your question, so you said you thought it'd be related to ownership, but in my mind there's certain, what's the word, compartments in property. So it's first of all ownership and buying and selling. So that's been an interesting move now. There's online real estate agents. I know in South Africa I think there's one called Property Fox, and then overseas you get online mortgage companies. So that operates in that sphere. And then the next, I would say, is more towards the commercial side. So perhaps office space, and then the massive explosion of co-working, which is tapped into the sharing economy, where space. It's a funny one. Like,
I suppose co-working and co-living in the case of Airbnb, for example.
Yeah. So you get definitely there's some interesting terms, and I mean they do straddle as prop tech because it's massive innovation, and it's the use of the space and how they let it or sell it, how they let the space, but it's also the use of apps and platforms. So in London there's actually a massive, well, there must be more than one now. There's massive co-living development in the east. Where is it? In the west of London. The name escapes me now, but basically it's like dorms for young professionals basically, and there's shared amenity space. So it's all about the community, which is what co-working is. So you share space, etc. So and tech has revolutionized that, because it's amazing. There's a lot of, how you could say, underutilized or dead space within property markets across the world, mostly within, I'd say, office space. So Airbnb has, people that had flats that perhaps weren't using them, or they were sitting empty, so they're underutilized. It's bringing those to the market, which is amazing. And in London, it's not only holiday. I mean, when I lived in London, I had friends who, when their lease came up and they were looking for a new flat, and it's a very tough market to find a flat, they would actually Airbnb for 2 weeks up to 2 months, while they're looking. So it fills this need. And then you've got this person, maybe they're going overseas for work, their flat's going to be empty. So you actually, the market, you're bringing space to the market, and you're utilizing it so much better. So like it makes markets a lot more efficient. And the same with office space. So if a company has 3 floors of a building and it hasn't been let for like 2 years, then they could say, let's spend a bit of money, put some desks, etc., and like a coffee shop, and then we could put it up for co-working, and you could these side parts. So it really has a big place. So within ownership, it's like residential, so that's personal or your home. Within renting and selling, etc. And then in the commercial side, it's how these landlords get their space out there and how they get it let. And then the next one would be investment, where crowdfunding comes in, and there's some really interesting platforms in the UK like Property Partner, and then in South Africa there's Property Mogul, and Thunder is obviously a big crowdfunding platform, but they also do property. And then within that is developers or investors can raise money for a project from crowdfunding, or like this Property Partner, you can go find so there's a flat in Manchester that's let as a student market, and you can put in from £500 or 5,000-10,000 rand, you can buy like a 0.5% or 2% of this property, and get the related capital and income return. So it actually opens up the investment benefits of property to like a much wider market. Obviously you got to buying and selling your shares, you need to do your homework, but it's just to demonstrate there's lots of tech. That's a big one actually, is investment. In my view, it's just revolutionized, because before you needed family to lend you money for a deposit to buy an investment flat, but not any longer. So you can invest on a small scale, grow that money, and then when it's big enough, sell a share or something, and then buy your own property. So it's really interesting, especially when the volatility in global economies and markets and crashes. Pension funds, I believe, are they as of having your own portfolio, it's good to have them, but I think property is it's a definite must have, because there's always, it comes down to the old age thing where everyone needs a roof over their head, and they're not making any more land. So it's interesting. So property is an investment class. I think that's really opening up. It's really exciting.
So do tell me though, I keep citing Airbnb just because of their recent reference, and I was, really close to the data, having, worked with them and so on, but not because, they rate in my mind as a leader in this proptech field, which they might be or not. I don't know. I just, there's something they kept on saying. There's some rhetoric that they're promoting, this idea of the democratization of tourism in their context, this idea of the democratization of capitalism in general. Do you see this trend as potentially disrupting capitalism, as it were, disrupting the status quo we described at the beginning, regarding, traditional land and property ownership in the British context, obviously linked to the Crown and to the Crown and Friends, as it were, and then on the continent, thinking about our context and the complexities that we constantly navigate, post-colonialism, and also just the rich heritage we have in terms of how we think about land as Africans. How do you see this trend impacting on those things?
I think it's going to have a massive impact, linked to what I said before, where historically property was controlled by the rich. And if you go way back, the landlords, there were feudal laws where, the landowners, there was almost slavery. They would, the people who lived on their land would be beholden to them. Bringing it forward, a lot of, those wealthy families, so say in the UK, it's obviously very developed country, and it's got a rich history. So those families still own. So I mean, obviously it's a very hot topic. It's very sensitive, but in terms of land redistribution in Africa with a colonial past, I think it's something we all need to talk about more, especially within the property sector in South Africa. Julius Malema spoke at the SAPOA conference this year, and I think
what's
that was
SAPOA,
really
by the way, just for those who aren't familiar.
SAPOA is the South African Property Owners Association. So they're the largest body that represents commercial property owners and investors in South
Africa. And they would invite Julius Malema. For those of our listeners who don't know Julius Malema, he's easily the most a polarizing figure in South African politics. He's
Yeah.
what? He's basically a socialist
Yeah.
proponent and an all-round fascinating man, I'd say.
No, he is, and he's very clever, and he does make a lot of sense. Obviously, I don't agree with all his policies myself, because being a property person, when you start taking land without, any compensation, it's like, if anything, it would collapse the market if you started taking shares from people.
I'm not trying to sort of
Yeah.
sort of put you on the
Yeah.
spot in terms of
No, no.
the politics of it all, but I'm curious to know where you were going in terms of telling us what he was invited to speak about at Sapoa.
Sorry, yeah. So I'm not actually sure what his specific focus was, but it was around land and redistribution, which is very topical. So I think it's good that they brought him along to the conference.
And so are you thinking that proptech is going to play a very important role in that debate at that sort of level?
Most definitely. I mean, think about it. It'd be good if it started with the state, and they own probably the biggest landowner in the country, so they could identify an office block or something, and then they could bring on a private sector partner to run that building, rent it out, and then they could put that on a crowdfunding platform and offer it to like people earning less than 10,000 rand a month, and you can invest from 100 rand. So that means anyone from a security guard, nurses, teachers, these people could have access to the property markets, and that's real, and that's effective redistribution, because they're actually giving them access to that, and they can grow that investment, like I said, and become property owners where perhaps no one in their family has ever been a property owner. So I think it has a massive part to play, and I think it's really important in South Africa and Africa, because it's an achievable. The platform it makes the goal achievable to actually distribute ownership of land to people. So I think that's really exciting, and I mean,
I was gonna say my next question was gonna be in the context of everything you broke down very nicely, like the sort of subgenres that fall under proptech as a broader umbrella. And I was going to say in the context of the continent, like what are you most excited about personally, and one and two, what do you think, which genre do you think stands has the potential to make the most impact in terms of how, in terms of the everyday relationship Africans have with property ownership and land in general?
There's a lot. I think there's a lot, but I think in that the crowdfunding platform, which allows people to invest very small amounts of capital into property projects, will be interesting, because you mentioned like capital. Sorry.
Or the democratization of capital?
Yes, sorry, yeah, because used to you had to go to a bank, but that's no longer the case. So
the democratization of capitalism.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So this gives people access to that. So I'm really excited about that, like letting the everyday man on the streets, he's able to invest in property. I think that's really exciting. And then also different, which is somewhat connected, but there's also like home ownership and different tenures. That's perhaps a different thing, policy side. But just to stick to the topic, it would be allowing everyday man access to property investments, because then also there might be small scale developers that buy units in townships or build flats in townships or anywhere in the city, affordable housing, medium priced income. These things could happen, and then first of all, those small developers, they can start their business, and they don't have to approach banks, etc. And then the everyday man gets exposure to this amazing asset class, and then it does redistribute the wealth, because it's hard, you can buy shares in property companies, you can buy flats, but that's limited to quite a small portion of the population. So
those sort of companies, some of them listed entities, typically have investments in already developed areas, which and kind of why I'm excited about some of the developments we're hearing about in places like Ghana, for example, where technology is being leveraged to update land registries and There's,
Yeah.
moving and shaking in terms of leveraging sort of blockchain-enabled tech
Yes, that's very exciting.
to do that sort of thing as a foundation for what you're describing. I can certainly see the average, African citizen being able, well, and I say that very carefully because the average African citizen probably can't afford basics, never mind property. But, you understand what I mean. Relatively speaking, the access to the opportunity to partake in the upside of property ownership is that much more, the chances are that much more improved for,
Definitely.
over time.
You touch on, those are actually crucial things. So I almost jumped the gun in saying that opening the investment market, but the most important issue to be addressed in African property markets is tenure. So you cannot have a functioning property market if you don't have a reliable, trustworthy way to record ownership, and then because that you can't transfer property, buy and sell it. So you touch on a big point, and blockchain could actually, like Kenya with M-Pesa, technology allows, they can skip infrastructure and go straight to the latest technology, and it could just open up these markets, and the property transfer, etc., could become so much easier, transparent, reliable. So that's actually that's one of the most crucial points.
So, Sean, I'm catching up with you at a time where, you're busy penning an article for an industry publication in this space, and that's actually how our conversation came up. And so you're about to speak to a number of people about what's going down in the proptech space here on the continent. Here's my only request: come back after you've spoken to everybody,
yes.
and give us a sense of what
Definitely.
What you're learning from them, distill some of the insights and share them with our people. Could you do that?
Definitely. My goal is to find actually like South African proptech companies and see what they're doing. So definitely.
Fantastic. We look forward to that. Well, Sean Godoy, thank you so much for being on the African Tech Roundup, and hope to speak to you soon.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Sure thing.